Okay, welcome back, everyone. It's 1 o'clock, and we will restart our discussions. When we left off before lunch, Councillor Palat had raised the issue of training and overtime in the organization and budget amounts. And so, Councillor Palat, as promised prior to the break, I will return back to you and give you an opportunity to bring forward any resolutions or motions that you have on that. And I guess, as a reminder, too, for all of us as we're framing our motions, technically, I suppose, we are acting as committee of the whole today, and so it's committee recommend council. But in any case, it's probably more of a technicality, and I'm sure our legislative services would clean that up for the minutes. But Councillor Platt will go over to you for those issues that you'd raised prior to the break.
Thanks, Mayor Gibbon. I guess, yeah, I just wanted to pick back up on, I guess, where we left off on, and there was a couple line items specifically when we got our packages from administration. On our training development, payroll, and overtime, we've actually increased the amounts from 2.5 million to 2.9 million and change for a difference of about $385,000. We're talking a lot about efficiencies. We're hiring more staff, potentially, and I'm trying to get my head around in an organization of our size, which hasn't seen a lot of growth the last 4 years, why we would need to continue to add to overtime and training. I also want to speak to the fact that if I put the motion out that I would love to put out if it was my own company, it would be a lot more dramatic than this, and I wouldn't lose sleep over that. 1% is a fair number for training and development, and we're going to be at 1.5%. So it's a big swing. I can appreciate there's mandatory courses we have to do, but I don't think we have to send courses to everybody. And I'm going to say this on behalf of the multiple employees that have talked to me, saying, if I have to go to one more course so what I think I heard you say was kind of course, a lot of our staff are not really excited about going to these courses to begin with. So I'm going to propose that we reduce $500,000 from the training and management and overtime budgets. I'm proposing this because I think it's a safe number, and it doesn't affect us letting people go. It just forces us to be a little bit more prudent on what courses we're putting people in, why we're putting them in those courses, and where overtime is at. So I urge you to support that. It's almost a 0.5% swing in our taxes just by being a little bit diligent on our overtime and our training.
Thanks, Councillor Platt. And so just to ensure our recording secretary gets the motion correctly, the motion is to remove $500,000 from the 2019 training and overtime budgets. Is that correct? That's your intent, Councillor Platt? Okay. Our recording secretary has that. And I just, is there anything on a technical level, or is that sort of does the intent, would management interpret that motion in alignment with the intent? Or is there anything that needs to be massaged? I'm looking to Ms. Walker or Director Grande. Director Grande?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My suggestion will be to split this in two and clearly define the amount for training component and for overtime, instead of creating one sum for both concepts, because they are quite fundamentally different.
Okay. Councillor Palat, how do you see that? Go ahead, turn your mic on. Yeah.
Sorry, can I just have you guys know I like money or running numbers and calculators here, so can I just have a minute to kind of see what motion I would pick for each amount out of that 500,000?
Sure. Yeah.
Circle back here in a sec.
Yeah. By all means. We will.
Actually, you know what? I'm fine with going ahead with this now. Okay. I guess just looking at raw data that we've got in front of us, or it was in our packages, our overtime's going up by $150,000 alone. And I really got to say again, I think with new hires and some efficiencies that we're talking about, that should be able to go down. So I'm going to make a motion that we do $250,000 less in overtime. And to kind of speak this, and maybe it's better it is in buckets, this kind of maybe puts a little bit more oversight on where the overtime's coming from, so we can maybe manage those overtime efficiencies better. So I'll make a motion for $250,000 reduction in overtime from the 2018 numbers, or the...
Okay, and then so we'll do that as one motion, then you'll follow up with another one if you wanted to on training. Okay, so we'll refocus that to that revised motion of $250,000 in overtime in 2019. Open for discussion and debate. Councillor Blackburn.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I guess something that I don't understand in the budget that's presented to us is why the overtime is about to go up, and rather than simply making a cut, I would want to know what it is that we were intending to do that would require that overtime. And I would also like to point out that in the positions that we're adding, and I believe it's 21 for 2019, I don't see a lot of them that are the types of positions that would incur overtime or that would prevent some of our workforce from having to do overtime work. So I'm just not sure that I'm not sure I can support just a wholesale number in terms of making cuts to overtime.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Blackburn. I see Councillor Clayton.
Thanks, Mayor Given. Question for administration. In regards to that overtime number, tell me where snow removal fits into that. And is the increase in overtime primarily something like snow removal? I know I saw it earlier in my books, but is it top of mind for somebody? That'd be great. Thanks.
Is that Ms. Walker, or look to Mr. Glavin, who's flipping pages to find that section? I suppose at a not associated specifically to fire, or sorry, to snow removal, I would be curious what actually, how does management arrive at the number that they put in the budget for overtime? So that might be more of a question for Ms. Walker, but we'll go to Brian first for answer to Councillor Clayton's question.
Thank you, Mayor Given. Currently, the overtime for snow removal, the budget in 2018 was around $108,000. In 2019, we're projecting about $98,000, so a reduction in overtime in snow removal. So it's not being driven by the snow removal budget.
So then,
Sure, go ahead, Councillor Clayton.
if I can just speak to the motion, I will support the motion. I think that with current efficiencies being under the microscope of CLT and efficiencies being a high priority, that we will find labor efficiencies as well. And so to reduce that overtime number is quite reasonable. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Clayton. So I'd be curious, again, Ms. Walker, what is it? How does management arrive at the overtime number that's reflected in the budget?
Thank you, Mayor Given. So in some areas, overtime is incurred to do work that is required of that department on a more regular type of basis. So that I know that in some areas, overtime is used to help the oversized vehicles go down the road. When they travel through our city, somebody has to go and move the traffic lights out of the way to allow those vehicles to get through. Typically, that is not done during the day. Typically, that occurs in the evenings after hours. There are other instances in our organization where overtime is required for things like the fire service or the enforcement service. Typically, to budget for overtime, we look at historical actuals and calculate in a component to address where we think overtime will be incurred. So I believe that it is almost a question that should be asked during each package presentation. The other directors would have a more accurate answer for you.
Okay. So about how overtime was reflected in that service area.
Exactly.
Councillor O'Toole?
Yeah, I understand where Councillor Palat is coming from, but I was wondering if it would be more diligent on council to have all overtime approved by the manager or CLT rather than just come up with a number, because we look at weather, it's uncertain. We look at staffing situations, it's uncertain if someone's sick. And I'm just not sure if I could come up with a number. It would be more give direction to management to be more diligent is what I would like to see. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor O'Toole. Councillor Bressie?
Thank you, Mayor Given. I'm just wondering if management could speak to, does this managed manpower strategy have any impact on our overtime in the organization?
Ms. Walker.
Not directly, no.
So just the reason I'm asking is if we have a vacancy that we leave open for 2 months, we're not seeing a lot of impact in terms of employees around that position having to take overtime to fill up slack.
Ms. Walker.
That would be minimal, Mayor Given.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Bressie. Anybody else with discussion debate? I'll just say that I won't be supporting the motion. I think that this is a operational function that's driven by management's best practice and advice. I'm not so sure in training and development. I think there's some latitude about how much we choose to do. I'm not sure that we get to choose how much overtime. And I think that there are legitimate management strategies that might increase the amount on the overtime line by deferring adding a full-time position somewhere else. And so I think you could add a $100,000 position somewhere, or you could budget an additional $50,000 in overtime because you're expecting those employees to do that. So I don't have that level of knowledge about the strategy that management used, but I don't think that there's the level of discernment and choice that we might have here, especially with services that we don't have a choice whether or not we choose to provide them, like snow removal, like bylaw enforcement, like firefighting. And so for those reasons, I wouldn't support this motion. I see Councillor Clayton in the queue.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I can appreciate your comments. However, my concern is with an increased budget line for an opportunity to spend more on overtime, people will spend more on overtime. If we do not hold management and administration to a level of understanding that there's not just a bucket of money to spend on overtime, then we're never going to put our managers in a position to be accountable to their spending. So the opportunity here is to set the standard, set the tone, that it's not just okay to book overtime, to do a more thorough investigation of what your scheduling opportunities are, and not just have that bucket of money in overtime to rely on. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Clayton. Councillor Friesen.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I will be supporting this motion. I believe that one of the first things that can be looked at is really how well we're spending our days and how differently we may look at getting tasks done. And I know this is doable in a number of services, certainly not all of them, but certainly in a number. So I wouldn't think that we should get prescriptive about where those hours are going to be found. But I think that overall, a good hard look at where overtime hours are being spent is important in our private business. And I know that most of you realize we can't anticipate when the work comes, and when the work comes, we have to hop to. And with the new legislation that came out in January for overtime rates and expectations, we had to completely rearrange our scheduling, and in fact rearrange our scheduling just every second month. So there's a lot of different creative ways that people can look at how to manage overtime, and I think that the city can start to do some of that, but I would leave it to directors to decide in what departments that would be done. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Friesen. Councillor Bressie.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I'm going to be voting in favor of this motion, and I don't like voting in favor of it because I would agree with Mayor Given's point that this is in some ways a function of management that we shouldn't be meddling into. That being said, we haven't set a tax rate yet, and this is one of those places where I feel that I do need to get more aggressive going down into the weeds than I'm comfortable doing because we haven't set an overall direction for it. So this is one of those votes that's directly impacted by the fact that we don't have a clear direction on where we're going to tax rates. If we could get to that point, I'd be very comfortable saying, management, you guys figure that out. If that's overtime, if that's something else, great. But we haven't done that yet. So I'll be voting in favor of this motion, even though I do hear the other points. And it's not a motion I usually would vote in favor of. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Bressie. Councillor Minhas.
Mayor Bill Given. I got a question, like we're talking about the cut down the overtime, which is I agree with it. And I listen all the comments. To me, it's not going to cut down overtime. Will be overpaid in emergency situation like after hours or something happened, as Susan mentioned earlier. So how to manage that area? Like you're not going to stop somebody's in trouble and not send the guy to fix it. It doesn't matter that time what cost come to the city. We have to be safe, right? So how how that would be managed. I just to wonder if you don't have, but you're not gonna, if you over budget on the overtime, that will be okay or not okay if we do this.
Ms. Walker?
Thank you, Mayor Given. So if that became an issue in our organization, it would create a deficit situation that if we were unable to absorb that deficit, and we would make every effort to, but if we were unable to do that, it would be an impact to the financial stabilization reserve.
I see Councillor Plot's in the queue, and then Councillor Blackburn's behind him. So, Councillor Plot, we'll go to you, and you also have an opportunity to close. Okay. So we'll skip over then, and then we'll go to Councillor Blackburn. Thanks, Councillor Plot.
Thank you. Just a question for clarification. Do we have a general sense of how much of the budgeted overtime is planned versus unplanned overtime?
Ms. Walker?
I'm sorry, I don't have that level of detail here at the table.
I see Director Glavin might want to offer a perspective.
Certainly can't speak for, or thanks, Mayor Given. I certainly can't speak for all overtime, but with respect to transportation, so under Program 3219, for example, which is traffic signal maintenance, most of the overtime incurred in that area is for turning the traffic signals. So when an overdimensional load comes through the high load corridor, they go out, they send a crew out. They don't have a lot of control over the volume of the overdimensional, or they don't have any control over the volume or more or less the timing of those loads. So whenever that happens, we either have to reallocate people off an existing task, or we send out an additional crew.
Okay. Just that brings up on that specific area, are there revenue opportunities there? I appreciate that not every service would have those kind of revenue opportunities that one may, but I'm at least aware that we charge a fee to industry for that. Is that Mr. Glavin or Mr. Manuel? Mr. Manuel?
Certainly, I can speak to that. So both enforcement services and transportation services are affected by those sorts of requests. There is offsetted revenue attached to those overtime expenditures.
And do we have the opportunity to choose is that something that would be the subject of the fees and charges review?
That is correct. That actually is a fee that we relatively recently introduced. So it's fairly current, but it will be part of the review coming forward.
Okay. Thank you. I don't see anybody else in the queue, and if not, then we'll go to Councillor Palat to close. I don't see anybody else ringing in, so we'll move to Councillor Palat.
Mayor Gibbon. Just a question. It seems like a lot of this overtime is kind of getting put around us moving for overdimensional vehicles. Are we actually anticipating overdimensional vehicles going up that much from 18 to 19? And I'm also confused by the fact that in 19, I'll leave it at that. I'll ask that for administration, and I'll come back after that, please.
Mr. Glavin?
Thank you, Mayor Gibbons. So currently this year we have about $19,000 budgeted in overtime in that line, and that goes back to when the budget was initially set for the 2015 to 2018 cycle. We've been realizing substantially higher levels of overtime in that area, which does get offset by revenue that we collect for that service. So what we're doing in this budget cycle is recognizing that overtime has been significantly above what was projected in the initial 4-year cycle, and accommodating that with the current level of budgeted overtime.
Okay.
Councillor Platt?
So I can appreciate that this isn't a very big line item when it actually comes to the $1.5 million total. It's not as big of a line item in that area as we think, or I thought it was actually. I'm also going to point out that in 2019, at some point, the highway is going to be open, and we won't be doing this as much as we are now, unless I'm misunderstanding overdimensional vehicles not driving through Grande Prairie. No?
This is my understanding. So there are some other council members commenting. I appreciate that the overall scale of this program isn't maybe the main feature of this, but with respect to overdimensional vehicles, my understanding is that 116th Street to 84th Avenue would continue to be the overdimensional load corridor.
Okay, so fair enough. I guess at the end of the day, I think I can appreciate administration's is here to do what's best for their group and for their staff, and they try to do diligently to get us to set a budget where we need it to be. I think as council, we really have to ask ourselves, is holding a line or reducing overtime not a prudent thing for us to be doing as an organization? If we were a business, and I know we're not, but if we were a business, if we were a household, we'd be trying to figure out ways to not chip away at increasing costs. And this is an increasing cost where I really got to go back to, I can appreciate that 21 and a half hires might not have to do with that, but they should be relieving pressure in the organization somewhere if we're hiring 21 and a half more people. I don't think we're asking for a big needle dial here, guys. We're asking them to change overtime by 6% from what it's currently at. This isn't a big ask. I'm not saying we got to move mountains here, but I also think it's remiss of council to not put a little bit more oversight and a little bit more pressure on why we're doing some of the things we're doing. And this is just one for me. It's not a, hey, we're not pushing hard. It's a 6% ask in an area that it doesn't sound like is going to be that hard to obtain if we just put the pressure there. So sorry to administration to ask you to do this, but I think it's very doable, and I don't think it's going to change the outcome of how our operations are as a city. So I really urge you guys, it's $250,000 line item. We're not going to get to the numbers we need if we don't chip away at 200,000 here, 300,000 there, 500,000 over there. We're not going to find millions of dollars of buckets. This is a $250,000 bucket that we can easily achieve.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Plott, for that closing statement. I'll call for the vote on Councillor Plott's motion to remove $250,000 from the overtime line item in the 2019 budget. Please vote. Thank you. And that motion carries. And Councillor Plott, you had one as well on training.
Thanks, Mayor Gibbon. So yeah, similar, a different bucket, but similar kind of vein here. In our 2019, we're proposing to increase our training by about $235,000. I think we're already spending enough money on training. The pulse I get from a lot of people I talk to in the organization is that they wish they weren't in as many courses as they are. So I'm speaking on behalf of some staff that has come forward, and I appreciate their being honest with me about that. So I'm going to make a motion that we reduce our training and education budget, or training and development, sorry, by $250,000. I want to point out at this reduction, we'd still be higher than what industry would spend on training and development. So again, this is another $250,000 chip away at the bigger cost.
Thanks, Councillor Platt. So that motion is, I think, clear. Similar format to the last, but just focused on the training and development budget. And we'll open up for discussion and debate. Councillor Bressie.
Thank you, Mayor. Given a question for management that I'll likely have a follow-up question or two if the mayor permits me. I'm curious, I know that a big part of what the organization is doing right now is continuous improvement. And along with that, there's a need to give people training in lean. Would that fit under this, or would this be in a different budgets?
Who should I direct that question to? Ms. Walker?
Thank you, Mayor Gibbon. Yes, $200,000 of that the additional $200,000 in that training fund is specifically directed to training to bring our staff an understanding and ability to participate in our continuous improvement initiatives.
Thanks, Ms. Walker.
Well, then, if I may ask about that. So can you give me a bit of a picture, and I apologize if I'm jumping all over, maybe this is in the organizational efficiency bucket later, and if it is, apologies, but could you give me a picture of what that $200,000 is going to in terms of how many staff does that train? Is that training them to black belts or green belts? Is that consultant fees to come in and do it? Or is that could you just give me a picture of where that $200,000 is going?
So without having the exact dollar breakdown, my short answer is yes. It'll include all of those things. It'll include consulting services. It'll include certification of specific individuals to help lead our process reviews. So yes, all of those.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bressie. Okay. Councillor Blackburn.
Thank you, Mayor Gibbon. One of the things that is potentially in the training plan, maybe not in the immediately upcoming year, but something that we're considering is to meet one of our strategic priorities, which is to improve our customer service excellence across the board for the benefit of our citizens. And there's a good possibility that that would involve some training that will go across the entire organization. And I think that it's a worthwhile investment. And while I'm not sure whether or not it appears within this 4-year budget, I'm going to anticipate that it's something we will tackle over the next, within our term. And if that's the case, then I don't want to be taking away from the potential of achieving that strategic priority by cutting back on our training budget.
Thanks, Councillor Blackburn. I don't know if that's a knowable piece of information. I see Mr. Bork suggesting that he may have some perspective on that. Mr. Bork? You'll have to just turn your mic on directly. You're at the bottom of the queue, and I have to clear everybody else out if you're at the bottom. So for anybody in management, if you're asked to respond to something, by all means, just turn your own microphone on. Mr. Bork?
Thank you, Mayor Given. In 2019, as has been described, some money has been set aside for some corporate initiatives, including some of the efficiency, including lean. Management has discussed in 2020 using some of that funding for that exact initiative in providing some customer service training for the global organization.
Thanks very much, Mr. Bork. Next, I see Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. This isn't necessarily to the increase, and I can understand why we increased it based on what I'm hearing from administration. It's more in line with how our policies and procedures go with our staff when they undertake different training courses and seminars and stuff like that. I guess my question is there a reporting requirement? I couldn't find anything in our policies or procedures that would let me believe that it was. And the reason why I ask that is I guess I'm kind of looking for a bit of accountability. I know some training we send out to people, it's mandatory. Other stuff, it's fluffy like my hair, right? And if there's no actual accountability measures that are undertaken, like direct reporting to senior administration or to your manager as to what you learned from that account, or from that training seminar, then how do we know that that information stays within the organization, especially when that person leaves? So I guess to cut it short, is there any reporting requirements currently in our procedures or otherwise that say that a staff member, when they go to a conference or an event, that they have to tell you what they learned and leave that with the organization?
Thank you, Mayor Given. Yes, there is. In fact, mandatory training and professional development training is included in individual performance plans that are negotiated with the department manager in order to meet the department's overall business plan. And so I would suggest that this practice is different in every department, but I know that in the finance department, when somebody goes for a training event, they come back with the information that they get and share it with the rest of the people in the department. And I believe that that is the case for the most part. I think it's important to know that about 60% of our staff training fund is dedicated to mandatory training, and 40% then is dedicated to professional development. Those skills, that skill development that we experience from sending people to training events directly improves our ability to do our jobs.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Thiessen. Councillor Clayton.
Mayor Given, I remind Council that Councillor Palat's motion does not take away professional development or additional training. It is taking away an increase. It's, if I recall correctly, it's 6%. So I do not think that by reducing professional development and training that there's a natural correlation to see that we're going to have worse customer service. I think that of good management of people and choosing the right training, we will still have great customer service and we will continue to grow our employees. It doesn't mean that we need to throw money at it. We need to pick the right courses, the right professional training, and do a better job of choosing what actually needs to be taken and what we need to train people on. And I think that this reduction is slight. However, as Councillor Palat mentioned, small little buckets of $250,000 here, $250,000 here. They add up quickly. As council didn't support my original motion to have a tone set early, we're going to have to keep cutting things to get to a number that everybody agrees on. So I encourage you to support this motion.
Thanks, Councillor Clayton. I see Councillor Friesen at the bottom of the queue, and Councillor Plott would go back to you to close unless you had a question. Okay. So we'll skip over a few here, and you'll watch the camera jump around. We'll come to Councillor Friesen.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I'll be supporting this motion as well. I think that's a reasonable amount. It's not a huge leap. I appreciate that. I believe we can keep that 200,000 in for lean. That's important, and find it in other places. It just increases our acuity a little bit of looking at what courses are needed. And I believe that customer service is a culture, not a course. And I don't think we're going to lose out on that because we can't necessarily do all of the courses that we wanted to. So I'll be supporting. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Friesen. I see Councillor Bressie in the queue, and then Councillor Plott. I have a question though. Of our overall salary line, or what percent of our salary do we set aside for budget or for training and development? I see City Manager Galante.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Historically, the city allocated about 1% in terms of training. In conversations with the HR manager, Janice mentioned that many years ago there was discussions to use a 3 or 4%, but the number was kept at 1% historically. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Councillor Bressie.
Thank you, Mayor Given. Just another question along my previous ones. Are we going to be talking more about lean when we get to the organizational efficiency package, or?
Ms. Walker?
Yes, we will. Yes.
Great. I might have some follow-up motions to make sure that funding gets protected then, but for now I will be supporting this. And again, I hate that we're getting down into the weeds a little bit and that we're spending this much time talking about a 0.2% tax difference, but I think that we don't have a choice when I don't know what tax rate council is going. So I'm going to be voting for it, but again, it's not one that I'd usually support, and it's not one that I love that I'm supporting right now.
Thanks very much, Councillor Bressie. I'll go to Councillor Plott to close. I'll just say that I agree that going to these sort of specifics, it wouldn't be my preferred approach either, because I think the larger items for council's consideration were actually laid out in the agenda. And those are the financial strategies that we're intended to be voting on. This one sort of preempted that conversation. Personally, I have my own preference of what we'd like to see. I think that capital tax is an area where I could easily find $1 million sustained over the course of the budget, and I'd be very comfortable with that. But absolutely, we are talking about individual line items. I would just remind council that the agenda was set up for us to discuss really significant ones first, and we're by choice going into these specifics. Councillor Plott to close.
Thanks, Mayor Given. As somebody that's constantly trying to get in the weeds here and told not to, the reason I'm choosing to do it now is I don't want to get into line by lines, department by department to get into that kind of detail. So I thought this was a better chance to do that rather than getting into departments. To speak to why I really think this is important for the organization, I kind of mentioned earlier, but it's a double-edged sword for us that we have to appreciate at some point. Every time we put somebody in a course that maybe didn't need to be in a course, we just lost 8 hours of them doing something productive. And so this is a double-edged sword for us. It's not just a $250,000 line item. It's also the cost of our employee that's being put in a course that maybe didn't need to be put in the course. I'm not doing this to cripple the organization. If our city manager is saying 1% would actually be dropping this by 500,000. I'm only asking to drop this by 250,000. To be perfectly clear, I thought 1%. My original motion would have been $500,000 drop because I think that's where we actually should be. But I don't want to cripple the organization. I want management to have the ability to put people in courses and to move the organization forward. I also have to keep coming back. This is one of those ones I hope that comes back into a conversation later on, is having a good strategy about why we're sending people to courses and what results we're getting out of them. And so I'm hoping this will lead into another further conversation somewhere else in the next year. Just because I know it seems like we're in the weeds here, but it's $1.2 million line item. It's a 1% tax difference, just this one line item. So although it doesn't seem like a big number, it is a big number in the big picture. So I, again, really urge you guys to support this. It's $250,000, and we're chipping away at getting in the right direction. And we're giving the organization still a really good number to move forward with.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Platt, for that close. We will move to the vote. Please vote. Just check to make sure your vote is registered. Thank you. And that motion does carry. So we will move on. I think we're back to those larger items with respect to the financial strategies. We had dealt with managed manpower. And what was our next one on our slides, Ms. Walker?
Thank you, Mayor Given. So the next one on our slide presentation was the franchise fee for electricity adjustment. The proposal is to move it from 7.75% to 10%, and this would realize a $1.5 million revenue result. And again, is that enough of an introduction for you?
I think I'm looking around. I think so. Are there any questions for administration? This is currently reflected in the way the 2019 budget is structured.
Yes.
And so council needs to either accept it or explicitly reject it. Correct?
That's correct, and it would cause an offsetting increase on the bottom line by $1.5 million.
Okay, thank you. So do we have any questions or motions rising? Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. Susan, just in regards to the slide that was just on the list, so we saw 3 municipalities that have franchise fees, 2 that don't. Were there any other comparables throughout the province that have established franchise fees as well, or these are just the 5 numbers we're looking at?
Ms. Walker?
Thank you, Mayor Given. So there are probably any number of municipalities in Alberta that do have franchise fee agreements. However, we typically, when we compare, we typically have our 5 comparable cities, and that's what you see before you on the slide.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Platt.
Thanks, Mayor Given. Sorry, Director Walker, you'd mentioned, so this was a review we've done, and we hadn't done this for how long before this?
The fee of 7.75% was set in 2005, so that's 13 years ago.
Okay, which it seems like one to me that it's palatable. So I'll be supporting this. I think we have lots of conversations how we don't want to be the highest in the province, we don't want to be the lowest in the province. This doesn't put us in a spot where I feel like we're doing anything really bad. I guess my question for administration is: this something now that we're having a lot of conversations about fees and charges? Is this going to be reviewed annually? Moving forward.
Ms. Walker?
The franchise fee agreement can be part of that regular annual review.
Okay, thank you.
So we still don't have a motion on the floor about this one way or the other, and so I would like to request one. Councillor Thiessen?
Yeah, I'll move that we accept the change to the franchise fee to the 2.25% increase as proposed by administration.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Thiessen. Open for discussion and debate on that point. Councillor Bressie.
Thank you. I'll be voting in favor of this. And I think a big reason is because a franchise fee is an opportunity for us to get revenue from nonprofits and churches that don't pay property tax. It's also an opportunity for us to get guaranteed revenue from other levels of government's buildings here, where my understanding is that they don't actually have to give us grants in lieu of taxes. And we've had our property taxes steadily increasing while we've got some place in town that have been getting more municipal services, but they haven't had an increase in 15 years. So it seems to me that this is very equitable to be saying that we're going to split this across everybody that uses municipal service. So this is something that I'll be voting in favor of.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Bressie. Any other discussion or debate? I would just add, I think similar to Councillor Bressie, this is actually, this fee is directly paid by the consumer of electricity in this case. And so in that way, it if there is a so in essence, renters pay this directly rather than the property owner paying this directly. And I think that is equitable as well. And also, large consumers of this have some ability to impact the overall amount of their bill, unlike property tax, where you don't have an ability to impact the overall amount of your bill because it's based on the flat sort of assessment of your property. And so I think that this is an equitable approach and worthwhile re-examining after such a long period of time. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak to the motion? Don't see anybody in the queue, so I'll call for the vote on Councillor Thiessen's motion. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries, and that will take us to the next of the major strategies and potentially one of the more interesting ones. Ms. Walker?
You're given. The next financial strategy is the proposal to refinance $88 million of debenture debt. This would effectively extend the amortization period for these loans over the useful life of the asset and create an equity where the cost of the asset is aligned to the population base that actually benefits from the useful life of the asset. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay. Maybe one to kick us off before we have, potentially before we have any motions. Does counts, what alternatives are there? There's a couple of different sort of sections of debt, some at different interest rates, some at different maturities. And is there a way of considering those differently?
Certainly, Mayor Given. So the proposal that's embedded in the budget document now reflects a refinancing proposal on 33 separate loans. They have varying interest rates and varying terms to maturity currently. There are some other options. The first one being that the amount to refinance would be reduced to $82 million, and that would be the result of refinancing loans with a maturity, removing any loans that had a maturity date of prior to December 2026, so within the next 2 business planning cycles. That would realize a cash flow impact of about $4.2 million and would have an average tax flow benefit of 3.8 over the 11-year period. In that scenario, there is a stop loss payment of $3.1 million. The next option would see the refinancing of loans where the interest rate is less than the proposed 3.5%, and that would show a refinanced amount of $59.6 million. It would realize $3.9 million of cash flow capacity in the first 5 years, and with an average of $3.1 million over the 11-year term. The stop loss payment related to this initiative would be $3.6 million. And finally, there is a proposal that would see refinancing of loans with more than 3.5%, that are currently out at more than 3.5%, and that would remove also the loans that would be maturing before December 2026. And this would see refinancing of $53.8 million. The first 5 years would realize cash flow of $3.3 million, and there would be an average reduction in over the 11-year term of $2.9 million. and that would realize a stop loss payment of 3.1 million.
Thanks very much. Is there a way of visualizing the difference in terms of the overall sort of balances? Thank you. And so this can you sort of describe what this image is demonstrating for us?
Certainly. So the debt as it exists today is represented by the yellow line on this graph. The proposal that is built into the budget documents you see before you is represented by the green line. The red line represents the refinancing proposal with the loans removed that are maturing before December 2026. And the blue line is representative of the proposal that refinance loans, everything except loans below 3.5%. And finally, the black line represents the proposal that would see refinancing loans below, with over 3.5% and with the loans maturing before December 2026 removed.
Okay, thank you. I see a couple of council members in the queue. Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I'm just noticing on here there's a fourth line that I wasn't aware of. Can you maybe just speak to the fourth line, the black line that was on there?
So that was the final option that I explained. So that is a proposal that refinances all loans with an interest rate of more than 3.5%, removing all others, and also removes any loans that would see maturity before December 2026.
Okay.
So that's sort of a combination of options 2 and 3.
Yeah. So, and I guess, would you happen to have the information? I'm just wondering what the stop loss on this one is. We've got the data on the other options. I'm just kind of curious what the stop loss and the increased total to interest would be on this option.
So the stop loss is 3.1 million, and the increase in total interest is 18.7 million over the course of the 30 years.
Okay. And what impact does it make on cash flow?
3.2, almost 3.3 million for the first 5 years, and with an average of 2.9 million over 11 years.
Councillor Clayton.
Thank you, Director Walker, for adding that option to the chart. It was going to be my question, and now I see it's there, so I appreciate that. Mayor Given, do we have any motions, anything? So I would like to make a motion, I got to think about the wording here, to support, can we call the black line option 4, or what would you like to do? Sure. Okay. Option 4 as a financial engineering restructuring opportunity for the city. Speaking to this, as council knows, we are not necessarily safeguarding the future of our own youth. We are safeguarding the future of public money here. And this is a sound financial decision to refinance things that are over 3.5% and not refinance things that are expiring prior to 2026. So this, in my opinion, option 4 is a great opportunity for us. And with almost $3 million in gain cash flow over approximately 11 years, this will see implications into the future for ourselves. However, it still mediates the financial implications of the lifelong usefulness of a building. So I think, or of an infrastructure project. So I think this is a good use of dollars and a sound financial decision. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Clayton. So that motion's in order. Motion to approve the sort of option 4 refinancing model. Open for discussion, debate on that motion. Councillor Bressie.
Thank you. This is something that I think I support in principle, but I'm not ready to have an informed vote yet right now, and I've got a few problems with voting on it right now. One is we only let the public know about this at end of day on Friday. So this is only the second business day where the public's known this exists. It's a substantial change to how we approach debt. And I'm not comfortable us doing that without having a chance for the public to hear about it and call us and email us if they've got strong feelings about it. And so I'm not comfortable with that. The other issues are, as I have talked to people who've heard about this, what I'm hearing from them is we're comfortable with this if you're also doing really hard work on expenses and on revenue elsewhere. They're saying that they see this as something, if we're putting pressure on us in the organization to maximize both sides of our balance sheet, they can support this. But the people I'm hearing from can't support this if we're using this to give us some breathing room and not bring that pressure to bear. I don't know where our budget's going to end right now, so that's another reservation. But I think my biggest reservation right now is presumably sometime during this meeting, we're going to be debating taking out tens of millions of dollars on downtown. And it's hard for me to make a decision about how we've got our total debt picture when I don't know whether or not we're going to add $20+ million to that. So for that reason, I would move that we postpone this until the end of this meeting.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Bressie. Again, referring to my table.
That is not debatable, if that's what you're looking for.
Well, actually, a motion to postpone to a time definite is actually debatable.
Right. Oh, right. I'm looking at table. Yeah, you're right. I'm looking at the wrong table.
So your motion to postpone it to a specific time, the end of budget, is something that can be debated.
Right.
Discussion debate on Councillor Bressie's motion to have it towards the end. There's a queue of people that were lined up maybe to speak to the main motion, but to speak to Councillor Bressie's motion to postpone to the end of budget. Councillor Plott, you're in the queue first, and then I've got Councillor Clayton, then I've got Councillor Thiessen. So I will ask if you want to speak to this, or if you don't want to, then you can just say so.
No, I did want to. I had this similar concern as I like the conversation. I think management's done a lot of work on this, and we keep throwing more scenarios at them, and they keep getting them back to us. So I can appreciate you guys were probably working here late last night with scenario 4. I feel uncomfortable with having this conversation until we figure out what the number is going to be without this. And the reason I say that is I think we really need to show the community that we're going to dig in, and then this is the afterthought. And so I don't want to not do this. I'm just saying I don't like the conversation happening in front of the rest of the budget, and I think it's just something I would like to see it deferred to the end as well.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Plott. Councillor Clayton.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I can appreciate Councillor Plott's comments and Councillor Bressie's intent here. I guess for me, it's a good financial decision regardless of what the outcome looks like. However, if the consensus is that we need more motivation to get to a more palatable number without this sort of cushion of comfort in reduction, then I'm happy to support this motion.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Clayton. I see Councillor Thiessen, Councillor Thiessen, and Councillor Friesen both in the queue. When you're both really together like that in the queue, it makes it difficult to say, by the way. I'll just say that I won't support the motion. This, for me, is an impactful motion that really does inform how I vote on the rest of the budget. And I think it's very much in line. I think there's a strong correlation between the chart that Councillor Plott showed before about tax rates and communities that use this. We've seen that other comparable communities use strategies similar to this. Not all, but others do. I think it's a reasonable thing to approach, and the significance of it, for me, demands that we deal with this now, and then we can judge where we are as we go through the rest of the decisions that we have in front of us. That will be my comment on this. Councillor Thiessen.
I'm okay with Councillor Bressie's motion to postpone. I'm also okay with Councillor Clayton's motion as well. I don't know if I would 100% support it at the time right now. My preference is to wait until the end. We are looking at a couple days where we can really dig deep, explore capital and remove stuff there, and really show the community what we have to give. I know administration's given a lot. I was in line with probably the first option that was presented, and to stick with that, but I'm okay to postpone since we've postponed the tax rate or decrease as well. So that's how I'll be voting.
Councillor Friesen.
Thank you. I would like to go ahead with Councillor Clayton's motion. I think that if we can come to an idea of which of those scenarios we would be comfortable with, that gives us a great working number to move forward with. And it doesn't mean that if we come to enough of enough of a savings in taxes that brings us to the number that we want, we don't in the end have to do this, but it gives us an idea of that working number that we're playing with as we move through. And I think we need that right now. We've been saying we want to know what number we get to. We want these specifics. Why would we postpone this until after it's all said and done? Let's get this, because it's really our cushion. And we're not deciding that, yes, this is what we are going to do right now. What we are deciding is that this is the one that we're going to consider right now, and we don't actually vote on whether or not we're doing that until later. So let's decide which of these scenarios we want now. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Friesen. Councillor Platt.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a question for administration. Do we have an idea around the province with municipalities similar size? What's our debt ratios compared to them? Because one of the concerns I have about prolonging and maybe pushing our debt for a longer period is if we already have a high debt level, we're just kind of compounding this problem as well. It's similar to how I feel about taxes. So I'm just kind of curious if we...
Dr. Walker.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I was just checking to see if I have a slide that relates to that question. What I have is a tax-supported debt per capita slide that shows where Grande Prairie sits with other municipalities. Does that work?
It's probably as close as we would get.
Yeah. Slide 17. From the financial strategy follow-up. If you'll just give us a minute, we'll find it.
So in the interim, while management's finding that number, is that exactly what Councillor Platt asked? I guess a debt per tax-supported debt per capita?
Yeah.
Ms. Walker, is that what Councillor Platt asked?
Well, it's, I think, a little bit different. Could you repeat your question?
Well, I guess we were supplied something. I'm just not sure if it's an in-camera item or not. And it looks like the same graph that you might show, and I just wasn't sure if I'm allowed to speak to some of the information or if that was an in-camera just meant strictly for council.
That's fine. Yeah. No, I mean, that's publicly available information by all means. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I guess just to speak to the chart that we got, and I'm not sold one way or another where we're going, but when I look at this chart, we should have alarm bells ringing about our debt right now, like ringing. It's, we're 2.5 times the median there of where our peers are at. I took the opportunity to go on again on most of these peers' websites, looked at them. They have the same issues as we have, but yet we have a staggering amount of debt to them. I would be probably fine with refinancing our debt if it wasn't already exorbitantly high compared to our peers. And so now, because it's so much higher, we're also compounding this problem for a lot longer, which worries me. Just to backpedal here a little bit, to speak to Councillor Friesen's comments, my concern with this is, and this is my outright concern from the start, and I could appreciate where Councillor Clayton was going to try to find a number, is if we try to get to if we get to a -4, and then there's this, are we going to lay off the pedal and go, whoa, we could be at a -8? And that's my 100% concern, is that we're going to use this as our ability to get to a minus. And that's where I think this is really clouding what we're trying to achieve. If we're all in the room going, we're going to go line by line by line, and we're going to go through the buckets, and we're getting that, and we hit a -2, or whatever the group decides, and then this is on top of that, great. I just don't want this clouding going, boy, I hit a -3, and all we did was this. And so that's my really big concern of having this conversation in front of the overall conversation, and while I'll be supporting Councillor Bressy's motion.
Thanks, Councillor Platt. By all means, as best we can, let's try to focus on Councillor Bressy's motion. I think similar to Councillor Platt, it's sort of difficult to not discuss the content of this at the same time. It would reflect that at least some of those municipalities, well, specifically Medicine Hat, I know for a fact that their utility operations are expected to provide about $20 million a year in capital. So seeing a chart like this, and that $20 million a year in capital would mean that they have less need to take on debt because they have another revenue source that can help them pay for things. So a chart like this is instructive and is reflective of the truth. but it is not without nuance that is important to look behind the numbers and say, well, why is it like that? And I suspect that there may be other stories behind each of the different municipalities. But yeah, I think to the perspective around Councillor Bressy's motion, I think this is an impactful decision, as others have noted, and that's why I think we should deal with it up front. Anybody else in the queue to speak to Councillor Bressy's motion? Seeing none, then we'll call for vote on Councillor Bressy's motion to postpone consideration of Councillor Clayton's motion until the conclusion of our budget discussions. Please vote. Thank you. That motion does carry. And so we will consider Councillor Clayton's motion towards the end, and we'll move on to the next of our significant strategies. Ms. Walker.
Thank you, Mayor Given. So this financial strategy would see the consolidation of all of the city's fees and charges bylaws, some 20 or more separate bylaws consolidated into one bylaw. And then a review, comprehensive review of all of those fees and charges in light of updating them and bringing them into a current state. Some of those fees and charges haven't been reviewed for 10 years and upwards. So I'm happy to answer any questions concerning this one.
Thanks very much, Director Walker. Any questions at this point or any motions arising? Councillor O'Toole.
Yeah, Mayor Given, I'd make that motion to consolidate all of the fees and charges under one bylaw.
Thanks very much. And I think just to be specific, I think because it's not just the action of consolidating them into one bylaw, it's actually the budget implication. So maybe we just have it that the committee recommend council accept management's recommendation with respect to fees and charges. Because I think there are a couple of actions that are part of their recommendation. There's recognizing increased revenue and bring them all into one bylaw. So I think there's two things there.
I agree. I'll make that.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor O'Toole. Open for discussion and debate. Councillor Bressy.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if I could get a bit more of an expansion from management in terms of how aggressive you're assuming the fee change will be with this. And I think as I'm weighing the risk of this, maybe one of the biggest risks we take is when politicians have to touch something. And I'm concerned that there's just a chance that this could get to council and we say, whoa, scale back this fee increase that you did, or give user groups more time to adjust, things like that. So how much work have you put into figuring out where those reviews will be, and how aggressive are you in assuming that council will actually endorse all the recommendations that come along?
Ms. Walker?
Thank you, Mayor Given. So always a risk presenting a proposal to council and asking for approval. So no guarantee that what management presents will be approved. Having said that, I believe that our fees and charges bylaws, as they exist in their current form, are well out of date, and they are items that should be reviewed on an annual basis. We are expecting to realize approximately $250,000 of additional revenue for partway through this current this upcoming year. The other thing that I wanted to mention about this is that the plan is to present our proposal to council in the second quarter of the year, which would be prior to having to set our property tax bylaw. So the risk of council not approving what management proposes could be mitigated by an adjustment to the property tax bylaw at that point in time.
I also see City Manager Galante.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just want to clarify that our intent is every year in November when we perform the annual review to bring this consolidated fees and charges bylaw, unique bylaw, as part of our annual budget process. So it's an opportunity for council every year to review and adjust any numbers, because fees and charges vary across the province, and we're trying to be in line with other municipalities as well. So it's an annual opportunity that you will have.
Thanks very much, Mr. Galante. Councillor Plott.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I'll be supporting this as well. I want to thank, we've been talking about this since Jasper last year about fees and charges, and I want to thank administration for the work they've done till here and to get us going the right direction. This is another little $250,000 chip in the big cause, so I really appreciate that you're doing that, and I'll be supporting this.
Thanks, Councillor Plott. I just wanted to ask for future years, if does management envision a policy that would have a delayed impact of a change in fees for an upcoming year? I guess the reason that I ask is there's a number of users who may have longer term agreements or maybe in the middle of their contracts with the city. And so I'm not sure about the timing of a fees and charges review in November. Like I would have to think that they would be effective the following year. So has management considered that issue? You know, I think specifically of ice users, and if you could change the cost of ice time during the middle of hockey season, for example. Mr. Galante?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, that is correct. Even in the past, some fees and charges have been adjusted, and we use a tier system or step increases with different effective dates to provide enough lead time to the industry potentially affected. So it's not an immediate. We consider different industries to reduce the negative impact, if any, on the applicable industry.
Thank you. I don't see anybody else in the queue to speak to this item. And if not, then we will. No, the people that are in the room are the ones that get to vote. And so I will delay, I guess. Okay, so there's nobody else in the queue to speak to the motion to recognize increased revenue of $250,000 with respect to fees and charges. So I'll call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. And I think we have at least one more strategy. Director Walker.
The final financial strategy that's been incorporated in the budget documents in front of you is management's commitment to conduct a comprehensive strategic review of specific service delivery models to realize effectiveness, efficiency, and affordability. This initiative would take the form of a team approach to analyze a list of service delivery models and to make recommendations that would come forward then to council for implementation.
Okay, thanks very much. So again, we can absolutely have any questions that we might have about the strategy and or a motion to accept the strategy as recommended. Do we have either of those? Councillor Blackburn.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I would move that we recommend to council that we accept the proposal as presented.
Thanks very much. Any discussion or debate on the motion? I don't see anybody in the queue. So I will call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. And so, Director Walker, I think that handled all of, well, sorry, we have had each of the strategies come in front of us. We haven't made a decision on all of them. Was there anything else at this stage, or are we looking then to move on to our first service area? Mr. Galante?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would suggest 5 to 10 minute breaks to allow the next presenter, Mr. Manuel, to get his presentation on the table, and we can resume budget deliberation.
Okay, so we will, I see that it's about 10 after now. Let's say we'll come back at quarter after. We'll actually, for anybody watching, come back at 20 after because we probably won't actually start up again until then. But for council that's in the room, we've only got till quarter after. Thanks very much. Okay, so we will call our meeting back to order. And I think up next is our Be Safe, Feel Safe area, but I see Councillor Friesen in the queue. Councillor Friesen.
Thank you. I would actually like to make a motion to bring something back from the table. What I'd like to bring back is Councillor Clayton's motion from this morning, not this one that we just talked about before the break, but the one from this morning, suggesting that we ask that administration find an additional or reduce expenses by an additional $4.68 million, I believe was the amount. And why I would like to bring this back is because I think if we don't do it now, we are at risk of looking for it as we go along, and then we get into telling administration where they're going to find it, how they're going to find it, and we get down into that line by line, which we've all said we want to avoid. I think that if rather we let administration know that this is what we want to look at now, they can work on bringing back to us where they think it would be most reasonable to find that amount, if indeed we do agree with that amount. So I would like to bring back for debate Councillor Clayton's motion from this morning that administration find an additional $4.68 million in savings in the 2019 budget year.
Thanks, Councillor Friesen. So, we went to the rule book, and that motion is not debatable, and so I will call for the vote on the motion to take from the table the motion from earlier today, our first one of the day. Please vote. Okay. That motion does carry. And so we will come back, and so now I think the effect of that is that Councillor Clayton's motion is now open for discussion and debate, and we are at a stage in the program where we can discuss it. Councillor Bressie.
Thank you, Mayor Given. Just before we get into the debate, just a point of clarification for me. Councillor Clayton's motion has a specific number in it. At the same time, we've identified, I believe, $500,000 worth of cuts we've made to the budget. So does this motion need to be amended, or is your understanding that this would include those $500,000 we already identified? I just love some direction.
I think the motion is not specific to that. I think it would have to be amended to be inclusive of the other changes that have been made.
Great. Then would you permit me to make a motion?
Absolutely.
I'd move that we amend this motion to read $4.18 million instead of $4.68 million, just to reflect the $500,000 that we've already taken out.
Okay. So that motion to amend is in order. The essence of the amendment is to reflect the decisions that were made that had a budget implication. Any discussion or debate on Councillor Bressie's amendment? Councillor O'Toole.
Just wondering, Mayor, given if that number is still relevant, the number that was proposed by Mr. Bressie.
So my understanding is that to start the day, Councillor Clayton made a motion that was specific on advice of management that the number to get to a 4% additional 4% deduction would require $4.68 million. Councillor Bressie's amendment is to recognize that there was, we've already made some reductions. Council directly has made some reductions. And so his intent here is to take those off of the required reductions considered in Councillor Clayton's motion. So the answer is yes. Like Councillor Bressie is basically doing some math.
There you go. Thank you.
Any other discussion or debate? Seeing none, then we'll call for Councillor Clayton. You have discussion? Yeah.
See if there's another.
Well, actually, the motion is now Councillor Bressie's because it's an amendment. So you don't.
Sorry, we're on the amendment. I don't want to speak on the amendment.
Yeah. So we are on the amendment made by Councillor Bressie to have the number reflect $4.18 million rather than the originally proposed 4.68. Please vote. Just check council. Thank you. That motion carries. We move on to discussion debate on Councillor Clayton's main motion as amended. Councillor Friesen.
Thank you. I will be supporting this motion, not necessarily, because I think that that's where we'll end up, but because I believe it is a really good stretch goal. Around the room a lot today, I've heard, I'd be comfortable with this or I'd be comfortable with that. Well, being comfortable never gave rise to good, innovative ideas and stretching to do something that's really a little out of our what we had thought we might care to do. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. Again, whether or not we end on it, we'll see. But I do think that if we're going to do this exercise, let's do it big and create some discomfort and encourage some stretch. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Friesen. Councillor Bressy.
Thank you. I was struggling to press my button because Councillor Friesen took the words right out of my mouth. I think this is an aspirational goal, and I think that it's important that we set an aspirational goal. I would point out that we don't actually set a final tax rate till for months now. So if council doesn't have comfort with the proposals brought forward, we got lots of time to find proposals to get to this number in a way that comforts us, or even to change our mind in months from now. But I think it's really important that we're pushing ourselves, we're pushing our organization, because we've got great people who I think can find significant savings and significant enhancements. But I think that I want to be aspirational with them. So I'll be supporting this.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Bressy. Councillor Platt.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I'll also be supporting this for a number of reasons, but I think the biggest one for me is when we had that presentation today, and he's talking about the last 10, 15 years we've had a 2% inflation, probably lower than that inflation, and yet our taxes have been rising by I think the number was 4.3. That gap is why we're here, and that gap is why we're substantially higher than some of our other municipalities of the same size or operating the same kind of things. I think it's going to be a challenge for administration, and I'm looking at the administrative group here, but I'm confident they can do it. And again, I want to say I'm confident that the group can do this. I know it's a tall ask, but I think it's our role as council, when we're talking about a reset, to put a little bit of pressure on the organization every now and then. Not what administration wants to hear, and I'm sorry for that, but it's our role every now and then to put a little bit of pressure on the organization. This won't surprise you, but I've been doing the math as we're going along today, and from what I can find, we're only talking about $2.5 million when it's really all said and done of some of the things that have happened. I don't think it's the 4.1. I think it's even less. And so, I'd be happy to give my chicken scratch to throw it up on the screen if you guys want, but I'll be supporting this. I think it's a time for our organization and for this council to put a little bit of pressure, and reminding you guys that yet again, last year we could have achieved a 0 if we would have put a little bit of pressure on this organization, but we chose to go 3.7. And so this is a doable goal.
Thanks, Councillor Platt. I see Councillor Blackburn in the queue. I don't see anybody following. I see Councillor Clayton, and so you would close, obviously, Councillor Clayton. I would then go after Councillor Blackburn. Councillor Blackburn.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I truly believe that administration's honest intent was to do their very best to bring us a number that would be not only achievable, but impressive. And I believe that if they could have done more, they would have brought us more. I also believe that over the time that we've been dealing with the budget presentations, the consultations that we've had, and so on, this didn't come to the table then, and I don't believe it's fair to bring it to the table now. I disagree wholeheartedly with the concept.
Thanks, Councillor Blackburn. So, Councillor Clayton, I got a bunch of others in the queue again. We'll go skip Councillor Clayton, and would actually, Councillor Thiessen, before you go, I'll just jump in the middle, so I'm not towards the end. So I'm going to support the motion because I am interested in understanding, and I think it's helpful for all of council to understand what the impact of that kind of course of action would be. I think at this stage we're seeing it as the potential benefit and a good opportunity to demonstrate the direction that our organization is going financially and the resulting property tax benefits. I think it will be useful for us to see what the impact is on services, and then for each of us to decide whether or not the services that are impacted are core or will be noticed or missed, or whether they'll have an impact on the community. So I'm going to support the motion, and personally I'll reserve the right to object or vote against its implementation if I judge the impacts to be too negative on services that our residents would expect. So for me, this is absolutely, we want to set an aspirational target. Let's do that. But before implementation, I will consider very closely the impact that the implementation of that aspiration might have on our residents. I think management brings forward recommendations that account for risk to the organization in a whole bunch of different ways that council is not always directly aware of. I think that's something that we need to keep in mind. I think actually exploring this and seeing what the implications are might give us a better sense of that risk. And it may be something that we have to experience over time. But I will support the motion so we can have that exploration and then maybe make some informed decisions rather than a financial decision without understanding the implications of it. Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. And as I said this morning, I wasn't sure if I really wanted, I thought maybe this was a premature ask, but my feelings are much the same as yours. I would maybe support this now, and if there is a possibility of be successful and we get there, then hey, we did good. And I also want to highlight administration's been working on this for about 10 months, and they've done a great job, less than 10 months. Last 2 months, kind of without our previous city manager, which was driving it very well. And I think they've done a great accomplishment. And Ms. Walker, my hat's off to you for doing a successful job at this. But I also realize that in the next 5 months, some of the stuff that will be implemented, we'll be able to see some savings from what I understand in previous conversations. So I will be supporting this as well. And there you go. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor O'Toole. Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. Although I am in strong agreement with several of my council peers that we could do cuts and achieve certain results, I'm not sure that it is going to be to the overall financial benefit of our community. We're doing a 4-year budget here. Everything that's being proposed is frontlined in the 2019 year, which is all right. My understanding from administration was that, you frontline your expenses up front, we build the capacity, create the efficiencies, and then we move on from there, 2020, 2021, 2022, and into the future. My concern is if we force administration's hand to cut too hard, too fast right now for 1 year, just so that we look good in the newspapers for 1 minute, because that's as fast as it's going to pass. We're not going to build the organizational capacity to find those efficiencies. And I think that's really what administration is presenting to us here. I'd actually rather go line by line than determining on an arbitrary number and seeing where we can find that and sort of lobby for what we can cut or not. I know that's an arduous process, and I know that's long. And I am interested in seeing what a 4% reduction looks like according to administration. But my concern is moving forward into the future. For that, I don't want to risk tomorrow for today's gains, so I can't support this motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Thiessen. Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I guess I want to go back and thank administration yet again for showing us we probably could have been to a zero last year. And I also want to remind, I guess, the staff maybe don't hear it enough, that I've heard actually more comments about our service improving while we actually found that surplus. So I think there's a little bit of a misnomer that we think people equal service on every occasion, and that more people equals better service. And there's many studies done on that doesn't have a direct correlation on how good your service is. So although I'm worried about what service implications can be, I'm very confident that this isn't going to affect our ability to serve our community in a proper way. And I do want to, again, I'm going to keep bringing these charts out that we've been receiving because I like the numbers and I like the data, but we have a lot of departments that, even though we only grew by 26% and we didn't grow by a lot of space, some of our departments have more than doubled in size in 10 years. And we've heard administration come to us while we've been sitting in closed door meetings saying, these are departments we feel strategically we could find savings in. That hasn't been brought into this conversation yet today at all. So I don't think we're overtasking administration to do this. I just think we're asking them. I think it's our job to ask them, and that's all we're asking them to do today.
Thanks, Councillor Platt. I don't see anybody else in the queue. And so it is Councillor Clayton's motion as amended. I'll go to Councillor Clayton to close.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I can appreciate Councillor Thiessen's comments. However, the line by line that we would go through, I don't think best serves the knowledge and the input from CLT. And this number, although it may seem heavy up front in 2019, it sets the tone for years going forward. And administration has communicated with council that they feel there's many opportunities through priority-based budgeting to find other money. This sets the tone for the next 4 years. Albeit the reduction as shown at 3% was approximately $96 per household. And so at 4% may be over $100. And it may not seem like a lot of dollars to the individual person. It may be something small like buying an extra punch pass at the Eastlink Center. It may be taking your family skiing one weekend or going to the movie and out for dinner more often throughout the year. I think that it also sort of it instills an opportunity in the community that council is doing a great job, administration and council are working together, and that the city is in good hands. It helps rebuild investor confidence, whether you use your extra money to buy a rental property or whether you choose to take that plunge and open a small business. By having this confidence instilled in the community that we are listening to what people say, we're listening to what the business owners want, we're listening to what the average person who's buying a house for the first time, who can't afford to buy the house because they look at property taxes in the city and it's not affordable. This addresses all of these things and it sets the tone for the years ahead. I really feel that it's helping build confidence. I don't think it's our job to really determine what people do with their money. However, I do think it's our job to make sound financial decisions with public dollars, to build a safe community and provide opportunities for success while investing public dollars that create economic opportunities. I encourage council to remember what they have heard from our citizens and our business owners and support the motion. It is simply the right thing to do. Our community needs this and deserves this, and this money will set us on a path for the future success and opportunities of our city. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Clayton. So we'll call for the vote on Councillor Clayton's motion as amended to direct management to bring forward opportunity to reduce the 2019 expenses by $4.18 million. Okay, well, comfortable if that's the motion. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. And so with that, management will have an opportunity to work on that at their leisure. He says jokingly.
I'll bring the coffee.
But we were or are slightly ahead of schedule for the day. And so we'll see where we go with the presentation from the Be Safe, Feel Safe section. And if that's concluded, perhaps early, if that's concluded early, perhaps we can use that additional time to give management an opportunity to respond to the motion that just passed, rather than trying to squeeze it in another service area before 5 o'clock. So if we finish early, would there be a consensus that we can give management that opportunity to respond to that previous motion? Okay. Then we'll turn our attention to the Be Safe, Feel Safe package and Deputy Director Manuel. Chris.
Okay, so that was quite the prelude to the presentation here. So I'll just put out the caveat now that there is some new initiatives and resourcing indicated within this package. Clearly, as a result of the last motion, we may have to assess some of that, right? Okay, so I'm pleased to introduce what we call our Be Safe, Feel Safe package. You'll see the Be Safe, Feel Safe package encompasses primarily protective services departments, which is the RCMP, enforcement services, crime prevention, the fire department, GPREP, and the director's office and administrative services. Under the RCMP, some key services performed include emergency response, criminal investigation, traffic safety, crime prevention and community engagement, and technical and administrative support. This group is presently supported with 63 support staff and 102 RCMP officers. One of the questions that I've received in preparation of this budget was, In the last budget cycle, there was a significant investment by council in additional policing resources, and people have asked, what have the results been as a result of that investment? Well, I can tell you that in 2015, marked a elevated level of criminal occurrences within our city. And I think we all felt that our community satisfaction survey at that particular time noted a significant decrease in people's perception of safety within the community. So as a result, council invested significant resourcing into policing. And what we've seen since that time is in 2015, when we peaked in the McLean magazine's Canada's most dangerous city for communities over 50,000 people. Since that time, in 2017, we concluded with a 24% reduction in our crime severity index. And even more impressive, in my opinion, is our weighted clearance rate. So this is where a matter is reported to the police, investigated, ultimately concluded. Our weighted clearance rate increased 59%. So essentially, those dollars did correlate to some significant results. Another department is enforcement services. So enforcement services consists of the city's bylaw officers, peace officers, animal control function, parking enforcement, and business licensing. This is an area that, as previously mentioned, has grown fairly significantly over the course of the last 10 years particularly. Now, this growth has been primarily in support of either new programs such as the expansion of our business licensing programs, or B, to support the police and operations. So not only do we invest in RCMP resources, the RCMP are supplemented through what we call tier policing with enforcement services. So sometimes certain policing functions of lower risk are allocated towards our peace officers and enforcement services who are in a position to maybe better deal with those calls. And the integration between the RCMP, enforcement services, and crime prevention has actually been a key priority of the last year. And within our business plans, you would have noticed that they've been consolidated under a bigger banner called public safety. And that was an intentional direction just to ensure that those groups are collaborating and that we're not overlapping and duplicating service delivery. Within enforcement services, one thing is interesting to note is since 2015, the last time additional resources were added to the department, there's been approximately a 30% increase in calls for service. And a good part of that is related to that call distribution coming from the RCMP being reallocated towards enforcement, and also community knowledge of the programs that enforcement services provides. The third public safety component is our crime prevention department. Now, crime prevention, they speak to the softer and more preventative side of root causes of crime, things such as family units, integrating immigrants and migrants into the city, into our culture, and into our social fabric. And additionally, they maintain programs such as youth intervention, public education, and they are actually embarking on a new program in conjunction with the RCMP and enforcement right now, which we call adult intervention, which is I'm going to speak to a little bit more later, but it essentially speaks to addressing some of the social concerns that have arisen in the community. Oh, sorry, I'll just back up one. The fire department has been a large department within the city of Grande Prairie for a long period of time. It's core service. It presently consists of a 98 full-time permanent staff. It had 4 temporary dispatchers as well as 4 casual dispatchers. It consists primarily of the 911 fire dispatch operation, in which they provide 65 fire departments and over 200,000 people 911 call answering services, as well as dispatch for fire operations. 75% of the calls for service received to the 911 center come from cell phones. This has created a greater complexity to the role, as determining the location and the appropriate agency is much more complex than what a landline would be. And new technologies such as text to 911 and in-call location, again, have all increased the complexity of that job as a result. Additional staffing this year was added to the Fire Dispatch Center, but it was funded through a provincial grant program. Operations has seen an 80% increase in calls for service over the past 10 years, and 2018 is trending towards an 8 to 10% increase. Operations would consist of everything from fire response, motor vehicle collisions, medical co-response, and alarms as kind of the primary call types. And additionally, they have the Fire Prevention Investigation Branch, which does the safety codes related to fire detection, as well as occupant loading and investigations and root causes of fires. And then following that, we have our GPREP Disaster Services Department, in which GPREP is a partnership between 6 area municipalities where we share in the emergency planning and response for disaster services. And that is actually now encompassing an emergency social services perspective as well, which I'll speak to a little bit later. Presently consists of 2 staff members, a coordinator, and a administrative support personnel. And then within the director's office, we have the director, the deputy director, and our senior executive advisor, who support the overall infrastructure and protective services division. And we have an administrative services manager, which essentially is working on organizational efficiency activities as well as coordinating our administrative resources across the service area to provide a coordinated and consistent response to administrative actions. So, public safety, some of the highlights of the Be Safe, Feel Safe package, the investments in the strategies that are expected to occur as part of the 2019-2022 budget include improving our response to local mental health and addictions, making sure our officer deployment is set to maximize service to the community, foster more community participation in crime prevention, education, and intervention, and enhance communication and transparency. The fire department, goals for the fire department right now are to maintain our 2018 service levels and resourcing, and that's pending what we're going to call an external service review conducted in 2019. This is similar to master plan that's previously been done, with the intent of that being give us an opportunity to take a wide angle look at fire operations, what the trends are, what the future opportunities may exist to be as far as deployment, structure, those sorts of things. And then this time next year, we'll have a much better idea of the direction that the fire service will need to move in the future. And additionally, within the budget, you'll find replacement of critical equipment. So at this point, the fire department's not adding any additional equipment or capacity. We're simply looking to replace, due to life cycle, the equipment that they have. GPREP and disaster services. So even without GPREP, the city would be responsible for maintaining its disaster services portfolio. That would consist of things such as our emergency coordination centers. Within this package, you will see us continuing to prepare people in plans so that GPREP in the city of Grande Prairie is ready to respond to large-scale emergencies. And additionally, we are looking to do life cycle replacements and upgrade technology at our city emergency coordination center. So as part of this package, we've included some strategic public safety personnel and equipment with the objective of supporting the goals that we just listed. So for 2019, that looks like this. We're asking for 2 additional RCMP officers. The RCMP officers will be deployed at the discretion of the officer in charge of the detachment to the areas that are requiring more resourcing at the time. A community peace officer. The community peace officer's role would be to work in conjunction with the collision reporting center that just opened up back in September. and essentially provide an on-site presence on our CKC campus. So they would be in a position strategically located to service both the Collision Reporting Center and the needs of the CKC site, who have requested additional support from an enforcement on a more regular basis. A public information officer. So administration or management believes that this sort of role is actually fairly critical to addressing some of the perception and engagement challenges that exist between our policing and the community. Presently, we don't have dedicated resources towards public information, citizen engagement, and as a result of that, I believe sometimes there's a disconnect. So earlier today, I introduced this package by saying we've had some significant results as a result of investments we've made in policing. I don't think the community understands that. I don't think the work that we are doing is always messaged in the way that it could be messaged. And sometimes we have some difficulty connecting with trends through social media and those sorts of things, and relaying the concern within the community back up to the management teams that are making the decisions. So we're looking to close that gap. We're looking to work outside of some of the policy restrictions that exist within the RCMP, being a national agency, and what they can and can't do regarding Twitter and social media and those sorts of things. And how is this position as a municipal employee that has the greater flexibility to interface between those two worlds? And then you'll see we have an emergency social services. So this is a temporary position that's proposed for GPREP. The city would have a cost portion of, not funding the entire position. And where this is relative is emergency social services is typically something that has fallen on the side of the desk of FCS programs in most communities, including the city of Grand Prairies and our regional ones. And due to that, it's become very difficult to manage it to the level that it needs to be managed. So the hope is this term position is going to be able to create some stability in that program and create some of the policies and procedures and those sorts of things that need to be in place to have a truly effective program for when people really need emergency social services in the event that their house burns to the ground and they need city support. On the capital investment side, you'll see that Enforcement Services in 2019 is seeking a patrol vehicle for a peace officer. Now, this actually isn't a new vehicle. In the last budget cycle, what occurred is several positions were added to the department at budget deliberations, and some of the corresponding equipment that would usually go with that wasn't included. So we used life cycle replacements. So we essentially replaced some of our old equipment. We kept the old equipment on the road, and have subsequently, we have a couple 2002 cars, for instance, that we're still utilizing, and we get some comments about them rusting out and those sorts of things. Their usable life is over. We're just looking to replace them. The fire department, as indicated before, again, has life cycle replacement of some equipment that they have in their forte as well. And emergency operations center technology upgrades, like I had mentioned. For the rest of the cycle, the only additional operating investments for these areas were the inclusion of 7 additional RCMP officers. Now, these are spread over the remaining 3 years, with essentially 2 officers in 2019, 2 officers in 2020, 3 officers in 2021, and 2 officers in 2022. In the 2020 to 2022 capital investment side, there's a second replacement peace officer patrol vehicle, additional fire department equipment replacement, and RCMP training equipment, which is added, I believe, in 2021. Collectively, these operating and capital budgets come to a grand total on the slide that you see here. So that's inclusive of all operating capital costs for each year, if this package as structured today was presented forward. So at this point, I guess I'm free for any questions and discussion.
Thanks very much, Chris. Questions from council? Councillor Clayton.
Thanks, Mayor Given. Thank you for your report. As I mentioned earlier, I think it's really important for us to provide a safe community for people, and I appreciate the work that that Enforcement Services has done, as well as our CMP and fire to date. My question is in regards to additional members. As we know, police members may be funded, and they're not always at the full capacity that is funded from council. If the 2 members are supported for this year, when do you foresee an additional actual body to the force? And in regards to the 7 additional members over the next few years, how easy is it to adjust that? If you put an order in the system and you realize, well, maybe we don't need, because we got all the other ones that all of a sudden filled the bodies, how flexible is that?
The process is actually fairly flexible in that the officer in charge does have the ability. So we have the staff establishment to essentially, so they can ramp up their recruiting if it's necessary to fill the positions they have across the country. That being said, if a municipality falls into a position where we find we don't need the resources, or if we need to hit pause due to budgetary restrictions and whatnot, it is fairly flexible in that we can request that they don't fill vacancies. We have approximately around a 25% transfer out rate. So it doesn't take long for a body to leave town, and transferring can be delayed.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Clayton. Councillor Russi?
Thank you, Mayor Given. I just wanted to ask a little bit more about this fire department service delivery model review. In terms of, I get the need to do things like that, but I think that there's also all levels of government probably have lots of things like this where they spend a lot more money on it than they needed to, and also things where it ends on a shelf and it never gets touched. So can you tell me a little bit about what's included this under $25,000, and also where the touch points for council will have to make sure it's on a track that we are confident will be usable for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the reasons that senior management believed that this process was going to be so important and left it within the budget is because a number of questions have been raised about fire response times, whether we need an additional 4th hall, the medical co-response, all those sorts of things. And instead of us, frankly, who are not experts and maybe not have the knowledge of what's occurring across other parts of the country, North America, the world, and how these very situations are addressed, we want that real wide-angle approach to understand what opportunities exist for us to either enhance our service delivery, lower expenditures, all those sorts of things, and provide council with some options as to what the best way forward.
Great. And just a couple more questions about that is, I respect that we probably haven't done an RFP and all that yet, but I'm curious, is it anticipated that public engagement would be included in this amount?
I certainly believe that public engagement's usually part of these master plans. I'm sensitive not to call it a master plan per se, because I think it may touch on things larger than what a typical master plan would have. Master plans are typically about growth. I think that will address this, but I think we're looking for something a little bit more broad than that.
Great. And then just my last question is, again, I just want confidence that whatever comes out of this is very usable. I get the need to do it, but so I guess my last question is just, where are the touch points for council going to be to kind of get a check-in on where it's going and how and what the outcomes are going to be?
No, that's fair. So at this point, we are early in this process. As you had mentioned, we haven't even built the parameters of the RFP at this point. So that's completely within management's abilities to ensure that council is fully engaged in the process.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Platt.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I'm just wondering, we had another package given to us at one point that talked about cell block guards, and I thought that was maybe part of this package. Can you maybe speak to that a little bit?
I certainly can. So one of the things that on a line by line that you would have noted is that RCMP expenditures actually fell in this budget from 2018. Now, one of the reasons that occurred is because the enforcement contract, which is the contract we have with K Division, where the RCMP provide us basically a turnkey policing operation for the most part. It included previously a cost for providing cell services, guard services, and they used a third-party contractor to do that. What happened is the management team at the RCMP detachment took forward an innovative approach last year and decided that, one, they could improve their service delivery by having in-house guards instead of using it through the enforcement contract. And then they were able to negotiate a fee for their services for housing provincial prisoners. So what occurs is once a prisoner, there's two scenarios. So after a person is arrested, if the hearing office that the justice of the peace that hears the circumstances decides whether they're going to remain in jail, the minute it's decided they remain in jail, and there's 24 hours for that to occur, they then become a provincial prisoner, and the province has some responsibility for the cost of that. Now, ordinarily, in a place like Medicine Hat, you would walk across the street and go to a remand center, or Red Deer, you'd walk across the street, go to the remand center. In Grand Prairie, it's in Peace River. So we end up housing a large number of provincial prisoners, and additionally, weekenders. If you're sentenced to serve your time on the weekends, they serve it typically in our Grand Prairie cells. Well, previously, we received very little remuneration for that. We are now recovering our costs for the cost of the guards, which are city employed, and additionally generating some revenue to offset some of the other related expenses. So it's culminated in a positive revenue source.
Okay, fair enough. And then my apologies, there was lots of information. I was trying to take pictures and write it down, but is the impact from the Be Safe, Feel Safe from the one slide, just the new hires? I think it was about 6 new hires for around 509,000 or something.
The cost implication, sorry? Is that what you're referring to?
I'm just looking at for a 19 implication, and then moving forward, I guess there'll be conversations about this probably annually going forward. I like the idea of adding more RCMP. I think it's a good thing for the community. But I'm just wondering if I can get my head around, we just made a motion around, we're trying to hit on this number, and now we might be going back and clawing the other way. And just so I can understand what kind of impact, if we went ahead with this, would make.
So that's a fair point. Again, kind of speaking to the caveat, when we leave here today and we have some conversations about that the $4.1 million, we will have to look at this as part of that, right? But in the absence of that, the cost implications to this would have been those things identified. So exactly, would have been those additional positions that we had placed up there, the capital, which is actually fairly small for this service area. Some of the other packages, you're going to see much more significant capital asks. And then there was basically inflationary costs related to the services, so things such as salary increments and those sorts of things. Now, one thing that is noted in enforcement between 2018 and 2019, which is relevant, is we did mark down our forecasted court fine revenues, which is essentially traffic violations. And that's because in 2018, in that budget cycle, 2015 to 2018, we had a forecasted number that wasn't met over the course of that cycle. So instead of continuing with a reoccurring deficit in court fines, we adjusted the numbers back to actuals and what we believe to be a it's still an aggressive target, but it's reasonable.
Okay, so that was part of that $629,000 write down this year then.
That is correct.
Okay, and just last question, Mr. Manuel. Trying to again flip through these. Are most of the capital items that you guys had requested, are they in the funded category right now or unfunded?
So all of the capital items I presented there are funded.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe just additionally, so are there other unfunded capital items for the service area?
Yes, that is correct. So within the capital duotanes, CLT did eliminate an extensive list of capital requests. I can tell you on the Be Safe, Feel Safe side, that request was primarily the fire department that took the brunt of that. Now, that being said, the rationale with CLT at the time was, let's go through this substantive review that we've asked for in 2019 and revisit those asks in subsequent budgets. One of the things that we have committed to do is to open this up every year and not keep it a closed book like we did in the last 4 years.
So just in terms of the capital items, the ones that you referenced in the presentation were the ones that made it through. There may be other ones that were requested but didn't make it through to be included.
Yeah, that is correct. We believed it critical.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Clayton.
Thank you, Mayor Given. A question for CAO Galante. Director Manuel referenced that although the $4.1 million may have implication to this, that's not necessarily correct. Council could approve this as presented, and that would in turn leave CLT decisions to make to find that 4.1 from other areas. Correct?
Mr. Galante? I guess essentially, what's the impact of council's previous decision on sort of this presentation happens to be the first service area that's up after.
It doesn't have to be impactful, is my point.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, council has the option to approve this package right now. We will reconvene this evening CLT to go through the full budget and identify items to reach $4.18 million with the least impact possible. I would say that's the general criteria. Not necessarily we will exclude items from this package. We may revisit as well, and tomorrow or Friday you will see a basket of options with items can be capital, can be operating, a mix of those for final decision. So you can vote on this package if you wish.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Manuel? I don't see anyone else in the queue. And so that being the case, if there weren't any other questions about the service area of the package, then I would look for a motion, probably either or. I think it really kind of is an either or. This sort of relates to Councillor Clayton's question. We could either vote to receive it for information, making no judgment on what's there, vote to approve or adopt it, with the recognition that management may come back and say, based on this other motion, our professional advice is that the thing you just approved, you should change here, here, and here. So I think we can do either or, but at some level, I think we need to sort of acknowledge that the presentation is done, and in one way or another. Councillor Thies.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor Given. I would move that we receive this report for information, and then we'll see what administration comes up with in the upcoming days.
Sure. Okay. Thanks very much, Councillor Thies. And I think, as I said, I think that in essence has the same effect. I think management still has that full latitude to say, okay, our advice on how to meet council's aspirational goal would be inclusive of these measures, and then we can review that. Any discussion or debate on Councillor Thiessen's motion? Seeing none, then I'll call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. So as referenced earlier, we are ahead of schedule, and we have given management a significant amount of work to do, to be frank. And so I guess I'd look to council. Are we comfortable with concluding for today, which is a bit earlier, and allowing management to have that time to bring back some recommendations? And I guess the other question would be for management, if council wanted to move forward, would it be possible to assemble the team to be able to be ready to respond to any questions that we might have? So if we wanted to move on with another service area, would we be able to get them here in time to be able to respond to our questions? Mr. Galante?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would appreciate if we have enough time today. It's a lot of work for CLT to be done this evening in order to prepare a list of options to reach $4.18 million for council. In addition to that, I think some representatives from engineering will be here, but they're not ready today. So we may resume the next package tomorrow morning, and we'll have time to do some work for the rest of the day at CLT, if that is possible. Thank you.
Okay. I'm seeing some nods of concurrence from around the council table, and so that being the case, we'll conclude our budget discussions for today, and we'll reconvene tomorrow morning at our scheduled time. I believe that was 9 a.m. And we will we'll start off. Would we start off? I got just one sort of process question. Would we start off with the discussion around the 4.1 million and then move into service areas? Because I guess the implication is that it may impact the service area presentations. Director Galante?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, my suggestion would be to revisit the package options initially, and then continue with the plan schedule after that.
So dealing with the the 4.18,
Yes.
and then moving into the service areas. Okay.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Well, so that's what we'll do tomorrow morning, starting at 9. Thanks very much, everybody.